Alright guys, how you doing? We got 2005 Ford Ranger today with the 3.0 V6, and it has a head issue. So those of you that are familiar with these models know that the 3.0 has an issue with the exhaust valves just kind of rescending into the head, causing compression issues and misfires. And that is exactly what is wrong with this truck. This truck is a family friend of ours and had a head issue, doesn't want to fix it, wants to get rid of it, and I made him an offer and now it's mine. Now here's the only deal. We're in Texas. I live in California, San Diego, and I'm about to do a head job in this apartment complex. Okay, flew in last night, grabbed some tools and stuff, and we'll be doing a head job. So you want to make sure you pick up a gasket kit, which we did, and you always want to replace both heads. Okay, we got two heads manufactured from clear water cylinder heads in Florida. Okay, we've used the company before. We've had so far a good relationship, and that's what we'll be doing. We have both bank 1 and bank 2 heads, and we will be replacing them. So these 3.0s came in various Ford engines, okay, and the head job is not too bad because it's an in-block cam. There's no cams on top, so all you really need to do is remove the rocker arms, the exhaust manifold, valve cover, intake manifold, and anything in the way. The service manual says that we need to discharge the AC. I'm hoping that I could just unbolt it and kind of move it out of the way. If I have to discharge it, I will, but that's the goal. So as you look around, it's a normal Ford truck. Things. I just wanted to spray a little lubricant on the exhaust before we get going, and it looks like there's already one that's missing and or broken from previous maintenance. So we'll get going with it. So this truck has 182,000 miles. It's the original heads, and the truck has been routinely maintained, but they were known for head issues, and this car definitely has it. It has a misfire on 5. My buddy who owns the truck, who's not as mechanically inclined, took it to his shop where they performed a leak down test and found that cylinder 5 exhaust valve was receded. And I believe it. I even spoke with a service manager just to talk about their process, and I just flew in here knowing I was going to be doing a head job. Hopefully no one complains at this apartment complex, but I'm going to try and get it all done in a day, 2 if necessary. It is 10 a.m. Texas time. The sun goes down about 4. It's about 50 degrees out here, and we're going to be working. All right, so we're going to take the air intake off first. We'll start working on the manifold. The fuel injector's got to come off. Any vacuum hoses in the way, anything on top. Okay, so with this, it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So the problem bankhead is this side. However, we're going to replace both. We're already there. You want to replace both. Don't do the job halfway. Okay? So before you get started, make sure you take lots of pictures of the engine bay so you see exactly how to put it back together. And we'll get started with the job. Alright, a little update. So we've taken off the air intake. We're now removing all the wiring and disconnecting the throttle body. We got the linkage disconnected for the throttle body and cruise control. So the way I'm looking at it is the throttle body will come off with the upper intake, which is fine. You got to disconnect the brake booster and disconnect disconnected the main wiring harness here. Now, one thing I want to point out is, look what happened here. Down this way. That's the exhaust stud. I went to remove the bracket down here. Let's get this camera to focus. To remove the bracket, and I think the stud was already broken because I didn't feel a snap. It just came off. So if this bracket becomes in the way, I'll get 213s and I'll remove those. But it's just showing you how fragile these exhaust bolts are, okay? So take your time and be careful. So we're gonna keep going. We're gonna remove this upper intake, the hoses, and go from there. All right, so now we're gonna be pulling off the upper intake manifold. It is a bunch of 8 millimeters, okay, to remove that upper intake manifold. So also keep in mind that you do need to drain the coolant and the oil when doing a head job. I got Pops out here coming to help. So he'll be draining the engine and the coolant, or the oil and the coolant. Looks like we might need a new thermostat gasket. Looks like that's leaking a little bit, which actually doesn't look original. Looks like it's been replaced before. Maybe just needs snugging. Yeah, fuel injectors need to be removed. Wiring harness, spark plug wires. I just disconnected everything. Throttle body can come with the upper intake. Then we'll have to remove the belt so we could loosen up the compressor, power steering pump. When we do this side, the alternator is going to come off. Upper hose. All plug wires got to come off. Yeah, we'll get going. Alright, so draining the coolant, you come down here and you find this little plastic valve.
This one?
Yep, pop that off and you'll drain the coolant. To drain the oil, well, hopefully you know how to do that if you're attempting this job. All right, upper intake is off. Here's a valve cover with a head underneath. Yeah, we're gonna need to remove some of this fuel injectors and just keep working, clear it all up. All right, so now we're on to the step of removing the fan clutch, and the belt. To remove the belt, we have the tensioner down there with a 15 millimeter. As you tighten it, the belt will loosen up and we'll pull it off. Then we're gonna have to remove this fan clutch nut. Remember, it's reverse threaded, so tightening is loosening it. All right, Pa, go ahead and pull that down. With a tensioner, pull it down, you can easily take the belt off. All right, so fan clutch. You notice someone's been here before because they chiseled it. Yeah, and they beat it up a bit. I'm guessing it's when looks like a water pump job was done because there's silicone used.
Take this back.
Yeah, so we're gonna go run the AutoZone or send Pops to AutoZone, and we're gonna get a fan clutch removal tool. They rent it out there, pay a deposit, come back. Pulley spins well with the belt off. You can spin everything, check the bearings, make sure nothing sounds bad. Pump was sounding a little angry. It's on its way out. All right, so while Pop is headed to the store, we'll go ahead and keep removing. We're gonna work on the top end, get a valve cover off, and start working on the exhaust from there. All right, so now I'm gonna remove the ignition coil with all the plugs on it, and then start working on the exhaust. So I sprayed it with WD-40, God help us that that's all we need. So they're 13 millimeters, one up here, well, 3 up top on every spot. 1, 2, 3. One's broken. How do you get the bottom 3? Well, you come down to the wheel well, and you look in here, and you have access to the bottom 3. 1, 2, and 3. And that's the same on both sides. Alright, little update video. I'm waiting for Pops to return with a fan clutch tool, renting it from AutoZone. In the meantime, I've pulled the alternator off. It is just plug, 10 millimeter positive wire, and then 3 bolts, which are 13s at the top. Easy, not a big deal. Exhaust manifold got to come off on that side. Fuel rail still got to come off. You got 10s right there on both sides. Creeping underneath. Not too bad of a job. Pretty easy. I'm gonna remove the alternator bracket. Took 3 bolts out of the AC compressor. Ready to move it out of the way. But there's a bracket here that you gotta remove so you can move this line. But this one's bent. I don't know from who, from what, or how. But you gotta get that bolt there, which you can't get nothing on with it being bent. I'll figure it out though. Alright, little update. AC compressors, alternators out. This little bracket I was telling you for the AC to be able to move. Look how twisted this thing is. It's a bolt that's attached to the water pump, right? So it sits in between those 2 nuts. Now the thing is, whoever worked on this car before me, you can see like they did the water pump. I wouldn't call it the best quality work. You see the clutch has already been kind of smacked down on. This bracket was bent, but you roll with the punches. Stuck 2 13s on there, got the bracket loose, and that's how it is. We're gonna try and remove the bracket that's attached to the head as well. This head's ready to go. We just need to remove the exhaust still. Fuel, this lower intake manifold, and the heads will be easier to access and to remove. Alright, so a little update. I thought the camera was rolling, but it wasn't. We pulled the fuel injectors, okay? So here are the fuel rail with the injectors. There are 4 8mm bolts, 2 on each side that hold them in. Once they are removed, you can pop them up. Now here's another thing, is that there's this little bracket down here, okay, right there, that holds a nut in order for us to kind of remove this out of the way. But we also have to remove that because it's a bracket that holds the power steering and AC to the head. So we got to remove it anyways. Alright, so we're removing the bracket for the AC compressor, idler, tensioner, and power steering in order to free up the head. So there's 1, 2, 3 that we already removed for the alternator set. Same thing, 1, 2, 3. There's one long one here. One I already removed down here that's just on top of the tensioner, and underneath the idler, see there's a third. They're all 13s. Once you remove those, we're just going to slide this forward enough where we can remove the head. Alright, so a little update. We got that third bolt. You can see it's technically fourth. You can see I left it there, but it's removed. So I got that was a 13 wobble socket. Now all we needed to do, I'm not removing nothing. I took a pry bar and I just separate it. That way it gives us enough room to remove the head. All right, what's left to do now is to remove the valve covers and the lower intake and the exhaust. So once those are done, we can pretty much remove the head. So valve cover, of course, 8mm, and then the intake, we got Torx. I'll tell you the update once I find it, maybe a T55 or something along those lines. I'll give you the exact once I get there. Also, we're gonna unplug the heater core hoses and tuck them away, along with the MAF, the crank position sensor, so we can just tuck the wire completely out of the way and just have room to work. Alright, little update. So we have everything out of the way, ready to remove the heads and valve covers. So valve covers, these 8mm deep socket you need, okay, all around. Then we gotta remove this intake manifold, which I'm leaving stuff to come out with it. After that, exhaust manifold, and that's it. So a little tip when you're removing coolant hoses that have been on here for generations is that if you can, once you get the clip down, I like to take a little flathead and get in there, flathead, pick, whatever you can do to start separating it. And I don't have two hands, well, one hand's recording, but I'm gonna spray a little WD-40 down there or any penetrating lubricant of your choice. Then you're gonna go ahead and get it all around, and it should be removed a lot easier. Alright, so a little update. We got both valve covers off, okay? So we gotta remove the valve covers before you remove the intake, because you see part of the intake is right here, okay? When you put them back together, you gotta use a little RTV, just a dab. And now to remove the intake, it is a T50. And you gotta remove, I may have to remove the thermostat housing, but as you see, it's all there, okay? You don't need to remove the cam synchro or the cam position sensor. After that, we'll remove the rocker arms and push rods. It's important that the push rod and rocker arm are kept in order, and each valve, each different one, okay? That's because they wear slightly differently, so you want to put them back in the same spot. Both sides is true. Alright, so we picked up this bolt buster or heat induction tool. I flew with it knowing that we would come across the issue with these exhaust studs. So the way it works is basically you put a little coil on it, it heats it up stupid hot, and we break the nut loose. That's all it is. In order to use it, you gotta use an outlet. So, thank you, apartment complex. We'll go ahead and heat up that exhaust stud there as a first trial. Try and break it loose, and we'll see what happens. Yeah, so we were starting to break these loose earlier, just WD-40. There we go. Nice. So we got the 3 lower bolts out. The 2 bolts up top. It would be a third, but one is already broken. So this pops right out. Alright, and just leave it hanging. Doesn't need to go anywhere far. Oops. Alright. That there. See, there's a broken stud. Once you remove the head bolts, head should come out. Yeah. Don't forget the ground on the back. What we'll do is we'll unplug it here and we'll transfer it to the other head. Same thing. But we got the gap there. We have the head bolts here, there, in between the rockers. So next we'll pull the push rods and rockers. Alright, so now we got the exhaust removed on both sides, just hanging. That's all we need. So here's how it's gonna go. We're gonna remove each rocker and push rod one by one. And the way I do it is I like to take a box, and here we have literally the box. This is the company we got the heads from, Clearwater Cylinder Head there in Florida. And we'll literally punch holes, put them through, and we'll label them. That way we make sure they go in direct order. This is how I like to do it, exactly with just a box cutter. Make a little square, I'll punch each push rod through each one, and then here I'll just sit the rocker arms in. Nothing crazy, nothing fancy, just to keep them organized. See, exactly like this. A little square, you get the push rods in, and the rocker arms sit right there. So you can kick the box now. Alright guys, time to finally remove the cylinder head. So you can see we have our lifters here. A little bit of sludge up there, but that's okay. But yeah, we got our lifters. We're gonna come with new gaskets. Alright guys, so it's about time to go ahead and change the heads. We just have 8 head bolts, 13 millimeters all across, front and back. Okay, I'm gonna change the spark plugs out once I get on the table. And don't forget that ground wire that goes to the back. Okay, same thing on both sides, 8 all around, and we'll start replacing them. Don't forget, we're gonna need a little RTV for this China wall here, and of course always use new gaskets. Alright, there is a wiring harness on the back that you gotta remove, but other than that, it's alright. Here's the head gasket coming off. Don't worry about that little coolant, because it's coolant jackets, so they tend to spill everywhere as you take it off. But I don't see a sign of a head gasket failure, not off the top of my eyes. No cracks. Head gasket actually looks okay. But we don't reuse them. Alright, so here are the heads. You have the new one and the old one. I'm going to switch over the ground wire and switch over the spark plugs as well. But everything matches, everything looks good. So let's start the install process. Alright, so we went ahead and changed over the ground and the spark plugs, and now we're going to clean the cylinders, the block, before we go ahead and slap on a new head gasket. One thing I want to mention too is that these heads are actually interchangeable. They go on the passenger or driver's side. Keep that in mind when you're buying or supplying. You want to buy both, okay? Don't be a cheap bastard and just buy one side. Replace both while you're there. Alright, you want to clean up the mating surface. The pop's already started. The Scotch Brite pad will do it justice. You want to just keep cleaning out. Make sure you try not to get as much crap within. And then go ahead and make sure anything that falls within the cylinder is good. There's no head gasket leak. If you had a head gasket leak, you'd see one of these pistons clean from the coolant cleaning it. But yeah, just keep cleaning. While he cleans, I'm gonna pull off this other side. Alright, so we're gonna throw this head back on. Got the new head gasket, and you must use new head bolts, okay? You gotta use them. They're one-time use, they stretch over time, and you can't reuse them. Sun is setting in the Lone Star State, and we're packing up the truck to finish the job tomorrow. Alright, day 2, just gonna finish up slapping everything back together. We got the head started, and still gotta clean up this side of the cylinder, of the block. So, head bolts, they're not torqued at all. We're gonna put some oil on them before we send them down and tighten them, and I'll talk to you guys about the sequence then. So here's a tightening sequence provided by Ford. So you're gonna tighten everything to 37 foot-pounds, loosen the bolt 1 full turn, tighten to 22 foot-pounds, turn everything 90, then 90. And here's the sequence of the order: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, we'll be doing that in order so you see it on camera. I'm gonna dip each bolt in a little bit of oil, and I'll go from there. Alright, so step 1 was to torque everything to 37 foot-pounds, which we did. Now we're gonna go ahead and step 2, loosen the bolts 1 full turn. Alright, every bolt has been loosened a full turn. Step 3, tying to 22 foot-pounds, and that's what we'll do now. Alright, so everything's been torqued to 22 foot-pounds. Now we need to tighten the bolts 90 degrees and tighten the bolt an additional 90 degrees. So here's what I do. I brought myself a little bottle of whiteout. And so you know that you're torquing the bolt 90 degrees, we're gonna mark, need 2 hands. We're gonna take the whiteout, and we're gonna mark each bolt at the 12 o'clock position. So when doing these 90 degrees, you do have to go in order still. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And first 3 o'clock, then 6 o'clock on the second round through. Alright, so you see our little white marks are in the 6 o'clock position from the second rotation. Now we gotta start working on the other side to get both heads in. Then we can put the rocker arm, the intake, rocker arms, and push rods back together. so we got both sets of heads in. The white position marks you see are 6 o'clock. Now I'm just gonna clean the lifters, clean this little china wall here, both ends, and we'll get the lower intake installed. Then once the lower intake's installed, we'll do push rods and rocker arms. All right, so we are preparing to drop the valley in. We put the intake manifold gaskets. We're gonna put some RTV in each corner, and then your intake manifold just sits right in. No RTV on the intake manifold, just in the corners. All right, so we're gonna throw in the lower intake manifold back on. So we have our gaskets in place. We're gonna put a little RTV on the joints, and then we'll go ahead and throw this back on. There is a torquing sequence that I will put an image down below, or in the video. And it's the same thing with the heads. There's a 2-phase torquing sequence, 11 foot-pounds, and I believe like 24 foot-pounds. But I'll link the picture on the video itself. All right, intake manifold is in, torqued. Now it's time to put the push rods and rocker arms. So we want to make sure you look inside. And the camera's not going to get the best picture, but you'll see the lifter right there. You want to make sure the push rod is directly on the lifter, not crooked or cocked at all. Throw your rocker arm on, and these go down at 24 foot-pounds. So the rocker arms are torqued down 24 foot-pounds, and you want to double check that the push rod is engaged on the lifter, but you just take a little light, and I was shining down below, and you can see it is centered. You want to make sure everything is, every push rod, and then now we can start the reassembly, where we can do valve covers, fuel injectors, the rail, the exhaust, start putting the belt drive back together. Start putting things back together. Alright, so we're going to start working on the exhaust manifold. We got the new gasket right here, and another thing is you want to use anti-seize putting these back in. So we have some new bolts that Ford had in stock, and we're going to reuse some of the old bolts. It's going to be a mix of both just because of what we got. But you want to make sure you put a little generous coat of anti-seize on it. Exhaust bolts go through a lot of heat cycles, so it's best to put anti-seize to prevent them from breaking when you put them back on, or when you have to take them off in the future. Alright, so now we're prepping the valve cover. And look, here are all the bolts. We put the new O-ring gaskets on them, all of them. And here, after we cleaned out the groove of the valve cover, we'll go ahead and put in the new gaskets that came with it. So as these go in, these are nice because they literally just fit in the lines. You want to make sure it's all pressed in nicely. Once it's all pressed in nicely, let's go install these. Alright, so before we put the valve cover back in, wherever you see these gaps, you want to just put a dab of RTV. That's good. Same thing on the back gap, where the intake meets the head. A little RTV there. Some people like globbing RTV everywhere. Personally, I'm not into that. The valve cover gasket will protect it just fine. So let's install it. Whoops, phone wasn't recording, but either way, it's pretty simple. You just lay the valve covers back in and line all the bolts up, same way you took them out. At this point, it doesn't matter too much the way you go about doing it. You can put your fuel injectors back in. You can start working on the front belt assembly, putting back together the pulleys. Just make sure you don't forget the heater core hoses and the way the wiring goes. Alright, so here we are. We just got in the bolts for this bracket that holds a power steering and AC compressor, idler, and tensioner. So you got this long bolt here behind this tensioner. Down there you got 13 in there, and then another side down here. Let's see if you can find it. There you go, another 13. So you have the 3 13s in the front, and then you have another 13 right here that holds this bracket into place. Let's get the camera to focus. So those 4 altogether is what holds the bracket for all this stuff. Don't forget to add a little oil to the new valves, because remember these heads came dry. So add a little oil, a little lubricant to prevent dry start. Alright, so now we're just going to start putting everything back together. We got the compressor lined up, just got to put the bolts down. We're going to start putting the alternator bracket in, heater core hoses, plugging in some wiring. I'm going to try and bend this bracket back into place. It goes right there, just holds the AC lines from jiggling around. And yeah, just start putting things back together. So let's get to the time lapse. Alright, so a little update video. We got alternator wired up, 3 bolts wired in. We got, don't forget, very important down here, let's go even lower, is your crank position sensor. If you don't plug that in, you ain't starting. Yeah, so a lot of people take off the fan clutch. I actually found a way around it. I removed these 10 bolts. The fan doesn't come out, but the fan has a lot of play. And then you remove the shroud, which is 2 10s right there. And just having those free hanging, I was still able to get the bolts in and out for the AC and power steering bracket, which that's the only reason why you would take these out. So you don't have to remove that. Ford also said you should, really get rid of the Freon and remove the compressor completely. I was able to just unbolt it and push it aside to remove the head. And So far, that's what I've found success with. Now I just got to put the intake back on, battery, hit the wires, and go from there. All right, another update video. So we got the belt back on. It's helpful that there's a belt diagram right there. 15 millimeter on the tensioner. And now all we have left is the intake manifold. We put the coil back in. Spark plug's gotta be hooked up. But gotta get down this upper radiator hose. But once we put the intake and the air intake, that'll be good. Intake manifold, we put new gaskets in, came with the gasket kit, so go ahead and we'll install those as well and get everything hooked back up. So a little side note, when you're just reusing all the coolant hoses, you see how they make these little wear marks? We call them witness marks. So you want to put the band clamp back right on exactly where the mark was left. If you shuffle it around, the wear is different and you may cause leaks. So go ahead and put it back on the witness mark. Same thing on all the little heater core hoses, we did the same thing. Alright, we got everything back together. We're just going to hook up the battery and give it a start. Fingers crossed. We need coolant still because we drained the coolant, or at least the radiator. But other than that, we'll do an oil change as well, but everything else should be good. Alright, as you see, wires are back in. Intake air hose is back on. The wiring harness is plugged back in together, the main harness with the 10 millimeter up top mounted. Everything down there is good. Everything's mounted. Just gotta connect the battery and give it a start. All right, everything's back together. We'll go ahead and start it up and see how it goes. Idling not too bad. We'll see how it goes once we run it for a little longer. Alright, it's running pretty smooth. Thank you to the apartments for not complaining about us doing this here in the parking lot. Now, next trip, road trip to California. Let's see how it goes. If you got any questions or comments, these 3.0 V6s are used in a lot of different Ford vehicles. Any questions, comments, leave it in descriptions down below. The only thing that's different about the way we did it is we didn't remove the fan clutch, and we didn't remove the compressor like Ford says to. All right. Any smoke is from your hands, greasy hands grabbing stuff. Nothing to worry about. All right, let it burn up, and got any questions, let me know.